We are delighted to welcome our listeners to Conversations with Construction Connoisseurs, a series that aims to advance construction management education and give access to that knowledge to young students and professionals so that it can be shared and added to. Thanks for listening to our discussions on leading built environment topics within the industry. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Kylie Dixon. So Kylie is a tender bid and pursuits specialist as bid coordinator. She has extensive experience in the building and construction industry on private and government bids ranging from $500,000 to $250 million. Upon completion of her architecture and construction management double degree, Kylie has completed several years of submission, coordination, design, and project management with opportunities on projects in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and several companies, including Lendlease. So Kylie, welcome to our show today.
Thank you for having me, Monica.
Could you please tell us a little bit about what you do and your career journey, seeing you have so much experience in the construction industry?
Well, I'd like to think that I've only got a little bit of experience when it comes to it because I'm still sort of a spring chicken. My background, I actually didn't go to university straight after high school. I actually worked in the like sort of interior design sort of aspect without a degree. I studied a little bit of graphic design. When I did go to university, I also went to Deakin University and did the double degree, which I think is an amazing opportunity. After that, I was working probably full time within my my final years, because I think it's a 5-year degree. So I was working full time in sort of like multi-res, sort of smaller builders. And then I moved down to, I got a grad job at Lendlease actually. And it's pretty funny because I was hoping to join Lendlease, the biggest, build the biggest buildings. And I ended up actually on a multi-sites capacity. So what we would do is I would, instead of just building one building, I was in charge of doing small projects, and we would get that from the client brief. So the client would literally give us a piece of paper and it would say, building at this site, or, refresh at this site. And then I would do design management. I would then tender and estimate. I would then go back to the client, get client approvals, design manage, and then deliver the project that I had just estimated for. So I got to see this whole round circle of the whole entire experience, which I think is amazing. I think after a couple of years doing that, I looked at what I was doing and what areas I really loved doing. See, I think a lot of us join construction management thinking we want to be project managers, right? And I went, you know what? I actually really loved this bit at the beginning where I'm selling things, and we're not necessarily selling things, but I'm putting my best foot forward, and you don't know if you're going to get it. And you're under a time pressure as well. So it's not the same as, in a project, you've got a time pressure, but usually you've got a longer period of time. When you're tendering, you've only usually got, depending on what size project, but sometimes as little as 4 to 6 weeks. So it's a really churn. So you're going through things very quickly, and then it's finished. So you don't have to deal with the headaches for too long. So that's my background. And now I'm running my own business. So I found out that bid coordination was an actual role, so I didn't actually know existed. And now I run a business servicing purely the construction and architecture industry with bids, helping people write better bids.
Awesome. So what does the title bid coordinator entail?
Well, I was thinking about this, and a bid coordinator is actually a new sort of job. When you think about it, I think probably if I looked, and I wasn't working and I wasn't in the industry 20 years ago. So tendering is like a super crucial part of building, right? Yeah. Like you can't really, like as a builder, everybody has to tender. It's not, you don't win jobs really outside of that, especially if you're doing government jobs. Yeah. So bid coordination, I think previously, even though it's so important to winning work, it wasn't really a role. So I don't know when the role bid coordination started out as, but I'm going to say within the last 10 years, it's probably where it's really formed to create a job, like a job out of it. Because the thing is, the way I look at it as somebody, I'm passionate about what I do, is if you're going to get all the resources, so you've got an estimator, and you think about the time that you think about the salary that estimators on, the time that an estimator has to put into each project to pricing it. You've got project managers, design managers, you've got construction managers, and then you've even got your state management all at some point having a touch point on this tender. But then you've got somebody who's quite junior sort of trying to run this thing, or someone who doesn't have experience doing bids. So I think that a bid coordinator, and like, their role is evolving, but generally in the simplest terms, if I go back to your question, a bid coordinator is someone who pulls it all together, keeps everyone in the same direction. You know, the day-to-day activities would involve reading the RFT, project management of the team, helping establish. So you might have a bid manager that you work with, depending what size company, what size tender you have. So it'll also be establishing the strategy and also ensuring that the strategy is consistent throughout the process. You'll be managing the team to make sure that they're getting everything in time.
So what are the relevant skills or prerequisites or even like qualifications that you would find becoming a bid coordinator? Because I also did apply for a lot of bid coordinator roles, but unfortunately I was getting rejected on the basis that I didn't have experience.
Yeah.
I was trying to sell myself out. I told them, I came from an architecture background. I have worked with InDesign extensively, so maybe I just got to improve on my communication and writing skills. But they're like, no, I think it's best if you probably work as a coordinator and then see how you go about it. It's best to get some experience. So yeah, I was just wondering what kind of skills do you require to become a bid coordinator?
That's such a shame, because I would have really loved to have you on the team. But I think a lot of the skills can be learnt. I think the most important part of it, however, is maybe, and I think having a strong construction background. So a lot of people who are in the role existing might have a marketing background, because tenders really are an amalgamation of writing and of design, and then of strategy. They're the three main things. But when you do those and you don't thoroughly understand the construction industry, you don't thoroughly understand your competitors, I think having that construction industry adds such another level to it. And this is the thing as well. Not to talk about money but I am going to talk about money, because it's now like this growing role. It's so highly in demand at the moment, especially with the amount of government infrastructure spending right now, that it's actually quite a well-paid job. So, but what I was going to go with that is, with those skills, I think because it's such a short turnaround of a tender, and most companies are tendering for too many bids at the same time. So I can see where they're like going, oh, I don't have time to train somebody, but I have no doubt that you would have had the skills, because essentially 90% of it is project management. It's just knowing the process, because every tender is going to have the same process. It's going to be strategy meeting. It's going to be continual meetings throughout. What information can I pull from where? Where can I get that information from? But
And how do you think bid coordination or a bid coordinator is different from a project coordinator or a project manager with respect to managing a response for an RFT or an RFP in that case?
Well, you don't have as much actual construction hands-on practical. So you're doing a 4-week turnaround, as opposed to working on a project where you might have a 12 months of actually on site running contracts. You're dealing with subcontractors. Likewise, my side, when I'm doing bids, though I'm still working with people, I'm working with my internal construction team. And I think that's probably the biggest difference. And it's probably the biggest difference, is you're working with your own internal team, and then you can see them running their own you might get a project manager to write a methodology, and you can see them struggling under their own sort of like agenda, running their own projects. So it's your role to make the job easier for them so that you can actually get something out of them, so that you're not doing late nights at the end of its submission.
So the next part of our podcast is going to be what goes into biddings. Now we're going to delve into the details a bit. So these questions might sound a bit technical, and I think it would really help our listeners to gain a lot of insights about the bid life cycle.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask one question: is that what constitutes the bid life cycle stages? Could you give us like an outline where the bid coordinator sits within these stages?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back even before you join with the bid coordinator. The first step would be you'd have your company BDM, so, or business development manager, might be even construction manager, depending on the size of the company. It could be the owner. They will see opportunities, and they might be getting those opportunities through the connections they know. So connections in business development for construction are very important. You want to make sure that you're getting the right connections with the right people, and that you're on the board or the tender list for the right projects. Otherwise you just completely miss out on the opportunity. So it would start with getting the opportunity in the door. Then it would come to a tender period. So before the tender period, and this is a thing, usually you get a rough tender period, but you can see them on the other side, and the people who are organizing the tender usually like ducks with their feet underwater, and they're trying to, you know, collate the actual form, the tender form, and the questions that they want to know to get answered. So they're usually getting that. So once that drops finally, which when it's government, it tends to actually blow out quite a bit. Once the tender drops, you get an RFT. So which is a request for tender, but go back before that, it might be an expression of interest. So I don't know if you know this about tenders. So you either go all government. I'm a government specialist. I do private as well, but a lot of the government tenders all have to be advertised online. So to make sure that they're getting the right people on the tender list, they'll do an EOI stage and then a tender stage. So it's only those people who get to the EOI that will get invited to the tender stage. Once you hit the tender stage or for EOI, you get like a form, and it will have a whole bunch of questions. And some of the questions are really simple. It's generally, you know, your company details, your company financials, your team, your projects that you want to screen that are relevant. It'll probably have your program, and it'll ask for also a methodology about how you anticipate they're going to meet some of the difficulties of this project and how you've met difficulties in the past. So that's the first stage, where you get the RFT, you break it down. You should then, as a team, so I would then join. So my client would give me the RFT, but even internally, we'll then have a strategy meeting where we go, what are our strengths? Why are we going for this? What makes us different than everyone else? Because everyone sort of has a mentality that winning work is about having the cheapest price or having the best program. But because I'm a specialist, I like to think deeper than that. I like to think, well, who are we tendering to? Is it a board? Who's in that board? Does anyone know any of those people in the board or on the panel, or any of the influencers that might be project management or architecture? What does anyone know what they might have liked in previous projects? You know, do they like a very structured process? Do they like to be involved in the process? Do they like to be led by a builder that just makes sure that, you know, if they don't have enough capacity, they want a builder that can sort of lead them? So that's the first process, is a strategy and finding out why we're going for this and what message we're going to carry through the tender. And then it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you've only got 4 weeks, and I got a team member and he referred to it as chaos and then stress chaos. And the stress chaos usually comes in the last 3 to 5 days when everyone realizes, oh no, we don't have this and we don't have that. But essentially it's a really high pressure version of just getting it's like getting a group assignment from university completed. I'm really honest. And you know the frustrations of having a group assignment at university, yeah?
Yeah. So, speaking of which, actually, what do you think constitutes the bid team? Like, what does the bid team structure look like in this case?
It totally depends on what project you're going for. So, you know, you work with a small builder under 20 million, and he may or may not have, for a $20 million project, and he may or may not have a bid coordinator. If they don't have a bid coordinator, I don't know how they do it. Someone has to pull it together. So once you sort of hit maybe 20 to $40 million projects, they're going to have a bid coordinator. And in that team, they'll probably have one, like the bid coordinator will be dedicated. They'll have an estimator, which will lead that project. They'll have a project manager. If they're lucky, they'll have a design manager. And then they'll probably have a process internally where at a certain point they review contract, because contract is very important, and they'll have a price review, and that might be done by state or a board in that company. And that's mostly it. It's such a small period of time to do something that, as much as like other than weekly meetings, you've only got, you know, you three weeks turnaround. It's not a lot.
So now, what does the reporting line usually look like in a small or a medium or even a large scale organization?
Like, you know, it could be that the bid coordinator works with the estimators. And I think in that sense, it's probably very important for the estimators to understand that it's not all about price, especially when you're doing government. So government projects might be 40 to 60% on price. So if you're in bid coordination, there's no clear delineation. It's not like you're going straight to the construct, like a project manager would usually go to a construction manager, right? Yeah. But in this situation, I think, and maybe it goes back to it being a newish sort of role. There's no 100% way. So you could literally be reporting to a state manager. You could be reporting to a BDM if they have a BDM. Yeah.
That sounds relieving, honestly. It sounds like a flat structure, and I'm excited to work in that sort of a hierarchy, because I feel like if it's too hierarchical, it's hard to reach the top and, you know, communicate effectively. But it's sort of nice to be involved with all stakeholders from all levels at the same time. So this is quite refreshing.
It can be. But then again, I've worked with companies where there's just levels and levels. I mean, it's the thing, as you grow in company and you're growing bigger, you do have increased levels of approvals, I think, because it's such a big thing. You know, it's a risk for a building company to put through a tender, because if they don't price it properly or they leave themselves with contractual holes, it puts them in a really big risk to win a project that perhaps they might make enough margin out of, or yeah, it can be a risk.
Is there like a separate bid writing team, you know, who had storyboarding sessions? You know, they try to develop and win themes and articulate value proposition? Because this is like a really interesting question I've been meaning to ask. Like, do you...
Well, this is what we do in the strategy session. What I did forget to tell you though is I've worked on a couple PPPs. So, and PPPs are a beast all to themselves. They work completely different. So when you're working tier 2 and under, you're working with mostly DNC now, lump sum, GC21. Now, when you go to PPP, now they actually, and this puts all the everything that I've told you previously away, because when you're doing PPP, they might hire out an office purely for that team. You might have up to 300 different stakeholders in an office, in a bid office, and that bid office might run for 2 years. So I just jumped into like one part of that process, but I can tell you it is so different than running a tier 2 bid. So you'll be in and everything that I'm saying about, you know, 4 to 6 week turnarounds and everything being quick. And I mean, in a big PPP bid, it is huge, but it's almost like a completely different beast upon itself. And I'm sure it's exciting, but you lose that part where you can just not throw away a project, but, you know, move on to your next thing within 4 to 6 weeks. When I come back to your question about the storyboarding and the strategy, yes, I don't necessarily storyboard, because when you think about it, in construction, you're working with a whole bunch of people who really don't value creative. Like, I think of it like the engineer's mind, right? You know, they're facts and figures and numbers, and just want to get this build, and how am I going to get this truck in here? So I don't think in a tier 2 and under sense, the storyboarding and isn't that strong. Now I'm the one who works on the themes and the winning themes. And to me, winning themes isn't necessarily about winning themes. It's about knowing your client. So I try and make it as quick as possible, because again, we're working with these people who think that it's a mindset thing. So a lot of builders, a lot of estimators, a lot of even directors might think it's only price. If I can help teach everybody that if they can understand the driver for the project, there's actually other little touch points. Like, I would buy, I'm trying to think of something that's, a $2,000 handbag. I'm trying to make this relevant.
Don't have to do
but
that.
but like, you could buy a handbag for $10 as well, right? But that, or it might be a pair of sneakers, you're buying something that can, if you want to go hike, a 100-kilometer hike, you don't want to get the $10 pair of sneakers, because they're not going to fit your needs. So the more that I can teach people how to understand the client, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a storyboarding. So if you do the big PPPs, you're going to do the 2 days of workshops and the storyboardings, because you're working with so many different people and stakeholders that are trying to get this across. And these big PPPs are so intricate. But when you're doing the anything under, say, 200,000, you still want to, you have to go, even though if it's a $5 million project, you still have to have a strategy. But it's about making that strategy accessible and helping everyone understand it quickly, because I find that most people fade out within 45 minutes. So you need to get the mixture of the minds. And I think it really is about having different minds in the room, because one person, it's just like design. It's anything to do with collaboration. One person might have this one idea, but because somebody else has a different perspective, they bring so much more value in just by bouncing ideas. So
what would you say are some of the challenges of being a bid coordinator?
Probably the biggest one is people management.
So yeah. Strong communication.
People management. Yeah, especially when you're working in construction. So you're working with people that you need to get information out of. But these people were project managers. They're used to pushing everybody else around, right? So how do you get someone who's insanely busy, who's used to not being told really probably what to do especially by me, I'm 5 foot little dynamo. How do you get what you need out of them? How do you help them see where to start? I think helping everybody take the first bite and get started and get direction and then get things to you is probably the hardest thing. And it's dynamic, right? Because some of these people might have time available for you, but some don't. So it's about it is so truly trying to get information you really need it within 3 weeks, sometimes 2.5, to get all your stuff in the document. So some of these documents are probably like, on a small scale, probably 120 pages to probably 500 pages. And we're talking about like whole plans. So you might have 8 different plans, including your project management plan, that need to be drafted before we actually get to submit this thing.
The question is, what are some of the bidding strategies that make you feel confident about your proposal?
Probably, I think of 3. One is that I'm external. So do you know, if you look at your own problems, you can't really see like, wow, I'm perfect, right? And then you get set in your own mindset. Like, you're always seeing things from your mindset. When I say it's probably not a strategy, but it's probably a thing, because I'm external, I can see where people are lacking. And when I say I can see, most people go, well, I'm really good at communication. I can tell you that actually that's what every other builder tells me. They tell me that they care about the client more than any other builder. And I can help them articulate what measures they do. I help them see where the gaps are missing probably the most, because everyone assumes you go, I am just good at communication. But with that, you know, and we do it on our CVs, right? You go like, I'm a great communicator, or I'm a team worker.
Yeah.
And they're all hollow words unless you have, for a construction company, processes to back it up. The other strategies, like the other things I use for strategy to help me win, and the probably two main things, is the strategy where we just have an actual strategy session. And I know it sounds so basic, but so many companies don't do a strategy session well. So it's all about the client, and going back to that breaking down process, because we make sure that we do it for it's consistent for every project that we do. We don't start without a strategy. I think that's one really strong thing. Combined with that first point, I make sure that the strategies are actually value adding and that we've actually considered the client. And probably the last thing as well is that, and this is only really relevant to me because I'm a consultant and we run a consultancy, but internally you've only got one big coordinator. And that one big coordinator might be running 2 to 3 of these projects at the same time, which, if you can imagine how haywire it is already, it's just mayhem, right? And there's only so much time you have in a day. With me, I'm running consultancy where we have someone with strategy, someone to pull it together, someone who's a professional writer, and a professional graphic designer. So there's one thing I notice, it's one thing I didn't do at university, is my attention to detail. Once you start taking, like, really making it's like the difference between getting a distinction and a high distinction, right? You've got to work pretty hard to get a distinction, right? But to get a high distinction, you really genuinely have to put everything, every little 1% that you can add on to, you need to do that. And I think it's the same with tenders, except for with tenders, if you're a distinction and you're not that high distinction, the number one, you don't win anything. And anything like, you know, these projects are, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 million. That's a lot of money.
Just as we're about to conclude our conversation for today, we're certain our listeners gain plenty of fascinating insights about the world of biz, plus career prospects in this niche field of the industry. So, Kylie, would you like to share a go-to quote or a book that probably defines your attitude in getting to where you are today?
At the time, but there's a book called The Alchemist, and after a year of business, so business is a really interesting thing upon itself, and it's interesting because you're creating something from nothing. You literally, I remember after a year I saw this quote, and it was like, what you think you create, which is a quote, right? But but I love, you know, after a year of going, wow, I've created something that I couldn't even imagine in my wildest dreams. You know, if you had told me 5-10 years ago that I'd be running this company, I'd be like, oh, you know, like, I wouldn't believe you. But now I look at the book, The Alchemist, and it's really about going along a journey and wanting for things greater. And then I think that a lot of the time, if your heart is in the right place, what is best for you will come. And I think more important to that as well, to me, is that knowing that everyone else's picture of what success looks like. So a lot of the time, if you think you're going for construction management, the picture of success to your peers might look like being a project manager. But for you, your skills might not be to be a project manager. Your skills might be to be an estimator, or, you know, there's actually some really, I'm sure there's some far out things like bid coordination I didn't even know existed. But I think for me, the most important thing is knowing that my skills at university, that I learned at university, my skills that I learned before university, all my interests, all come back to creating me the best version of my career now. So that's it.
All advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.